Continuing on from our weekly roundups from Stage 1 and 2, we headed into a new form Stage 3 with everything to play for and a lot of changes. From roster moves and new orgs to flashbang and loadout changes, this stage was set to have a different feel to either of the previous two. I'll be honest, I considered not carrying on the weekly roundups as they are extremely time consuming with the amount of games to watch and edits to make when creating the videos, but as they say, finish what you started. Plus, considering apart from Siege GG, I believe I'm the only creator in the scene to do regular consistent weekly videos rounding up the biggest moments from every playday and each week of competition, so I felt I owed it to the Siege community and myself to see the season out, even if the views aren't as much as my major tournament or non-esports videos get. So if you enjoyed this vid or type of content, show me some love and drop a like, subscribe if you're not already, and feel free to share it with a friend who might find this type of content interesting. I just want to do my part to grow R6 esports content and the hype around it, as I just love all these teams in tier 1 and the amazing quality of Siege they gift us almost every day when the stage is in full swing. So with all the sappy stuff out the way, let's dive into the first region. We had some big matchups on the first playday, and the highlight definitely being Oxygen Esports versus TSM, as both these NAL titans look to bounce back from a disappointing last couple of months. A strong second place in Stage 2 didn't translate well for TSM when it came to the Mexico Major, really struggling with missing Merc and finishing bottom in their group. As for OXG, a 6th place in NAL meant they didn't even make it to the Major in the first place, so this was set to be a telling game for me about how much or how little these recent setbacks have affected their confidence. And the outlier Merc, who wasn't present for the Mexico loss, proved his value off the rip in the first half, with a quad kill in round 1 showing to me once again that when he is playing at his best, his game sense is one of the best in the entire game. It was interesting to see OXG experimenting too, with Yago on Hard Breach and Kino on Ash, and talking of game sense, he is another one that even for a rookie is up there. Ash can be so much more versatile now than just being a pure aggro entry, and a player like Kino who has a high game sense but is also great with his utility can use Ash well. It was nice to see him be let off the leash a little bit to make the most of all aspects of his game he has to offer. And this was a lobby just filled with talent. Charlo was looking to be another highlight player of the stage, hitting shots like this.
Down he will go. No XG will maintain an advantage, but that's a kill found in the basement.
Oh no, Wax!
The half broke even at 3-3, just showing once again the level of competition in this lobby, as this was a top tier game and you can tell both teams are taking this stage seriously, and I feel are understanding even more now that they need to stay competing at the highest level to be in the right form heading into international events. OXG took the game away though in the second half, as their setups were really nice on defense with some creative strats being set up that weren't just someone lurking in a random position, but really elaborate counterplay to power positions for attackers around the site, wasting time that way instead. Plus Vert was having a big impact along with Kino, still going hot after his first half, top fragging along with Vert, finishing with 12 kills each in a flawless defensive half and a 7-3 victory for OXG in their first game of Stage 3. Despite a disappointing attacking half from TSM, I'm looking forward to both these teams this stage, as they look like they came ready to play, despite the scoreline. And the second highlight of Playday 1 was Soniqs versus Astralis, the new face for our Disrupt roster. Being picked up by a big org like Astralis, and not only that, but being the team they believe in to invest in as their first entry into the Rainbow Six scene, is something that can lead you to greatness or make you fold under the pressure. So Soniqs was a great first game for this old Disrupt roster, as Iconic and Coach Easily, backed by the Astralis pickup, looked to prove their old org Soniqs wrong for letting him go. And at least in the first round, they didn't seem to be too pressured, as DP Fire in round 1 almost single-handedly clutched a 1v4 in a post-plant retake. But Soniqs were looking really tidy and are a good team on Chalet, having all their flank drones in place and holding the angles with good patience before they execute. And this was working on Chalet instead of doing a full map take with difficult places to clear like anywhere in the basement. And talking of basement, Soniqs' clinical playstyle was on show, as they used the nip angle from Big Garage to clear the ADS on Solarium stairs with the Sophia stun to allow a nade to land from the window rappel. Beautiful synergy you just love to see, and it was backed by some more smart Maverick tricks and vertical angles. It snowballed into another 2 rounds as they stunned Astralis and any expectation they had, winning 7-3, essentially just being on a different level when it came to team play and strategy, and wasn't as much about who was hitting their shots. A perfect example being that previously mentioned Maverick trick, as when Soniqs did it, they had the control they needed and read into the hold that it didn't include a counter to that angle, And in the final round, Astralis tried it themselves, but J90 tried opening it on a solo Maverick and was easily killed from the counter above main stairs by an angle he wasn't expecting. As mentioned, the pressure was guaranteed to be there for the new signed Astralis roster, and after a tough loss to a great looking Soniqs roster, they did bounce back well in the second playday of the week, so the future is still looking good for them. And both mentioned teams from the first playday who had success also went on to have more success in playday 2, starting off with OXG once again playing, this time against Mirage, and they put together a winning run after their TSM win, as Mirage attempted to put first points on the board after SSG beat them the night before. Mirage looked a lot more confident in this game, winning their gunfights and trusting each other to make on-the-fly adaptations on attack, securing a really solid 3-3 half on a cafe attack. But as mentioned in the past, and despite the timeout they called, Mirage struggled on defense with coordination and decision making when it comes to what areas of the map they want to hold and for how long for. They did manage to pull themselves together and subsequently brought the score even back to 5-5, but OXG's composure was just building through this game, and the mistakes they were making earlier in the game were eradicated, securing the final 2 rounds and convincingly winning 7-5, back-to-back wins in their first week of NAL games. As for Soniqs, they were now up against SSG, and Grixer from the Soniqs, I believe, was the first player in Tier 1 to show us the appearance of a newly unquarantined Thunderbird. The way these two teams have played in the last 12 months have made this one of my favourite matchups to watch, as both these teams are so well coordinated. It doesn't mean that they're predictable always, but the way these two teams work off of their teammates is really impressive, and both sets of players are really clean, making minimal mistakes or unforced errors. But starting off on a hectic coastline, this wasn't the case for SSG, as they botched a few setups when it came to man advantage and isolating Soniqs roamers. Lycan clearly saw there were some issues and called a timeout at 0-3 before the first half started to get away from them. The misplays continued though, as team kills and misused utility found them at 2-4 down after their attacking half. And as mentioned, in a matchup of two teams that is defined by fine margins regardless of the score, Soniqs just left SSG behind, capitalizing on those SSG mistakes and not giving them back out themselves. Soniqs transitioned onto attack, and it continued along with players like Yeti coming into their own and starting to really hit their shots. They were just too clinical for SSG, which is something we don't say often. Super doing an excellent job at reading into when to plant, and the rest of his teammates having the vertical and horizontal control to cover the plant and hold down the post plant successfully. Hot and Cold was doing all he could to fend off a regulation loss, top fragging the lobby by round 11 at 13-7, running around coastline and gunning down the Soniqs, who were set firm at 6-3 match point. But despite coming close to OT, 5 rounds were all Spacestation were able to collect, with Super in the final round making an excellent call to flood deep into site to avoid the plant denial, completely reading SSG's hold and outplaying them. Amazing siege from Soniqs, and from Grixer dropping 100% cost to Super getting the diffuser down multiple times. If they can keep playing as well as they are, and especially on a hectic map like Coastline, I think this can be a great stage for Soniqs, and with gameplay like that, first place is not at all unrealistic. We saw Europe next, but then we also saw the final playday of Europe of that week be the last games we saw, so I'm actually going to jump into Brazil first. BR6 kicked off with a bang on Coastline, as our top two teams from SI once again faced up against each other, with Team Liquid narrowly securing a win against the Ninjas in Pyjamas 8-7. It was great to see Liquid's new signings hit the ground running, as Resets put in an MVP performance on his debut match for his new team, along with Ars doing a great job too, kicking off the game with a quad kill on Hibana in his first round on a new roster. What is it with rookies on their first round picking up multi-kills? As we saw young Alec from Beast Coast do the same thing, along with Benja going on to Cowana having an amazing game against Empire, which we'll get into a bit later. And hey, can't forget Kino's Thermite ace in his first round in stage 1. As for Resets, it was interesting, as I mentioned in my previous transfer video, to see if he would have to adjust his game on attack to accommodate Finesse and Paulu, and he did, swapping his common ops of Sophia and Yana for ops like Buck and Mav, who especially on Coastline, despite having jobs to complete, can still have an effect on the fragging power with strong loadouts. As for Nip, they matched Liquid's 4-2 half on their defense, with a great team fragging show being the answer to a strong Liquid performance, with Pino and Kamikaze getting 4Ks along with 3Ks from Psycho and Muzi, as it was a close back and forth game all the way to max overtime. But in the final round at 7-7, somehow with only 45 seconds left and 3 smoke canisters in the pocket to burn, in a full 5v5 scenario, Liquid on attack managed to open up the round with Paulu finding the opener and the rest of the team patiently surrounding Nip, isolating their anchor players from safe faraway positions, slowly suffocating them. Pino managed to even it to a 4v4, but a double and specifically an incredible flick for the second kill from Ask left Nip with 2 players being locked up from the remaining 4 players of Liquid, who easily shut down the remaining ninjas to find their first win of the season against arguably their biggest opponent in the league. Very encouraging game for Liquid from their new players, as honestly aside from Palu, it was these 2 that almost entirely carried the team on their back, with so many impact frags to close it out for them 8-7. The sky really is the limit for this team. If they can bed their players in so quickly like this to succeed, it's looking like all the questions and controversies surrounding their roster moves has been answered with an extremely competent first match for them. MIBR look to have returned to their previous form before their issues with Felipox having surgery, having a really competent 7-3 win against one of the dark horses of the BR6, Black Dragons, and I'm happy to say that the man himself, Felipox, closed the game out as the MVP, something that is a really good sign not only for the rest of the BR6, but for the November Major after their great 3rd place finish at the 6th Invitational. In this game, they not only seemed to be much more confident as a unit, but they were also much more consistent and committing less mistakes. Last stage we saw them sometimes overextend or make misplays, and consequently this has a knock-on effect on the rest of the team and their ability to fulfill their roles, as someone else on the team has to pick up the slack for whichever player is dying in the round without having any impact beforehand. On defense this time round though, every player put in a shift, and specifically the frontmen like Raps and Reduct, who gave support players like Lukid a much better chance of holding down the site in the final execute, after those players had been able to do much more damage to the opponent in the early or mid round to at least take some bodies off the board and waste time even if it left them in a lower man count, meaning the MIBR anchors could not be droned as effectively, or ops such as Echo or Smoke still had utility on the board to deny the plant or deep push into sight from the opponent. Honestly, not always, but for some teams, even one player who isn't even the outlying star of the team can have such a knock-on effect, positive or negative, for the rest of the roster. Being real though, this wasn't really a close game compared to last stage where this fixture would have likely caused them problems, but again it was just nice to see MIBR bounce back well. They easily racked up 5 rounds on defense, leaving them in a strong position on a difficult attacking cafe to find just 2 rounds after arguably struggling a lot more last stage on attack than defense, where they needed to be the ones to set the tempo, take the map control and hit their shots. So this is where the rounds really mattered for them to see if they were really back in business. And they were, as they did just that. Despite Black Dragons fighting back with a few rounds of their own, MIBR were assertive with their decision making, setting up their plants well and knowing what control they needed to have it covered. As much as full map control is the ideal situation, sometimes especially on a map like Cafe, clearing the entire map might be successful, but by the time you've opened up all the verticals to allow your planter to get the diffuser down, especially on kitchen, there often isn't enough time left to burn utility like C4s and smoke canisters. So MIBR saw there were holes in the Black Dragons defense and secured match point by exploiting them and getting off the plant in a 5v4 with no vertical control. And now at 6-3, BR were playing like a well-oiled machine we know they can be, punching in their final round to win the game 7-3 after a nice 3k and 10 bomb from guess who? Felipox. Honestly, so happy to see MIBR back in form. As I mentioned last stage, I really hoped that this blip with Felipox surgery and how it affected their results wouldn't spill over to bad form when he was back at 100%. I hope they would remember that what they are capable of and not let it tilt them longer than it needed to. Glad to see they proved me right, and regardless of future results, I really hope to see them at the November Major. And it wouldn't be BR6 without the upsets of a bottom half team defeating the big dogs, as Santos gave us our first upset of the stage, closing out FaZe 8-6 in overtime. No surprises when FaZe are playing that this was an electric frag fest, but despite Souls and Bullet on both ends of the spectrum having big games at 16 and 14 kills apiece, impressively Santos players STK and Cons matched up, with Cons dropping 14 kills himself and STK one bettering Souls with a 17 banger game of his own. A lot of Santos kills were much more impactful too, as even in round 1, Cons and Hunter were able to clutch a 2v5, something that should never happen at any level of competition. This FaZe roster has so much talent and the ability to beat anyone, but my problem with them this season, and especially something at the Invitational I noticed, is that they are way too sloppy. They commit too many errors such as that 2v5 or rushing without proper intel to be consistent enough throughout a whole season or at an event in a best of 3. It's a shame, but not all doom and gloom, as clearly with players like Cyber, Bullet and Souls, they have all sorts of talent and quality throughout all sectors of their roster, but that won't lead you much further than some top 4 finishes or relatively deep event runs, as even some of the more aggressive teams in the international sphere of Siege are very coordinated and don't make many mistakes with their measured aggression. A few times is okay to take a gamble or make an oversight, but I think they really need to work on this to level themselves up to being a serious threat on the global stage. Santos clutched 3 rounds from lower man count situations, which is unforgivable from FaZe, even in a 1v2. They were shooting straight but not thinking straight, giving away rounds for free after working so hard to stay level with Santos to overtime, something that they never would have even had to worry about doing if they had just closed out the rounds they were supposed to win. They gunned their way through this game with fragging talent much beyond what Santos have, but eventually the room for error ran out, Santos sitting at match point at 7-6, and once again the clutch came out from Santos, this time Cons being in a 1v2 with Warden, the droning not being good enough from FaZe as he shot both the remaining players without them initially even realizing where he was at, finally finishing up the game 8-6 for Santos. Disappointing stuff from FaZe, but great stuff from Santos showing their mentality, as this is a team who were in a similar space to Furia last season, but seemed to get left behind by a fast growing Furia in 2021. But honestly, many of the big upsets of BR6 this year have come at the hands of this group of players, so if this roster can stay together or maybe pick up a big upgrade / transfer to one of their players, then this might be one of those teams like Furia this season to keep an eye out for next season. And the fun was just getting started for Santos, who put in another great performance on Playday 2 and capitalised on another sloppy game from this time Ninjas in Pyjamas. Similar to the FaZe performance, NiP were hitting their shots, as Pino in round 3 collected a 1v3 and overall ace in round 2, something from any player that doesn't happen very often, as you would think after that they would just be on a different plateau to Santos. But as we say, kills aren't everything in Siege, and even the fact that Pino was left in a 1v3 means something had gone wrong way before that. The problem started to fester as you can't clutch every round, as Santos used ops like Zero much more effectively to have much more vision around the map and possibly avoid NiP players going unchecked, allowing them to just focus on the players in sight and their objective play. They were switched on, Hunter clutching a 1v3, and this essentially was the start of the end for NiP, as Santos were heating up and NiP couldn't seem to slow it down. Despite NiP keeping the round count close early in the second half, Santos started to pull away to 6-3, keeping NiP on their toes with a mixture of aggressive rounds and more slow methodical ones. You could attribute some of this difficulty to laziness from NiP, such as unthorough enough intel collection with missed drones or entering a location before it had been fully cleared ahead, along with their IGL and often important player Psycho having a rough day at the office. Although NiP were able to compose themselves for 2 rounds to bring the score back to 6-5, Santos were able to fend off overtime in the final regulation round, clash frustrating NiP not for the first time this match, as Psycho's misery continued being the opening pick. After a few trades to a 3v3, the clash just looked at the NiP players while the Thunderbird of STK picked them off, securing a 7-5 win and their second win of the weekend, being 2-0 against 2 of the top teams in the region. The question is now for a team like Santos is we know they can beat any team, but they need to have the consistency over the stage and should not at all overlook their counterparts around the bottom of the table such as W7M and INTS. They don't want to make those 2 big wins be worth nothing when all is said and done. After our new major winners Team 1 collected an OT win against W7M in Playday 1, they were now facing the next step up, facing Furia, a team to not be taken lightly, especially on Coastline where they were able to defeat Spacestation Gaming at the major. But Team 1 looked as hot as they did at the major. Alamar snuck into Sunrise with Nook and up Cool Vibe Stairs to collect a quad kill, setting the tempo of the game in round 2 of their attacking half, and both teams held close to another, ending the half 3 apiece. Furia looking superior with strategy, but Team 1 being way more clutch and hitting their shots, with KDS specifically having a big final round to the half, winning gunfights with the ARX and one-time scope that he had no right in winning. But Furia started to pull away, as I feel like their attacks are always really strong and they are great at making space for one another around the map, and once their gunners like Fantasy are at full speed, they can be extremely difficult to slow down, even for a talented team like Team 1. Team 1 tried as Neskin nearly pulled off an ace in round 9, but it was denied by Lender as he put Furia on match point, as honestly Furia had been in the driving seat the majority of the game. However, we've seen Team 1 have no margin for error to lose a round, similar to their 7-2 magical game against Cyclops, so they couldn't be counted out just yet. But the cards don't always fall in your favour, as this time it wasn't to be, as despite losing Fantasy and being left in a 4v5, the depth of this Furia roster shined through, with every remaining player on the roster picking up at least one kill to eliminate the 5 Team 1 players and winning 7-3, starting off their Stage 3 campaign with a bang against the major winners, themselves and Santos reminding us all this weekend of how well rounded this region is, and therefore why when it comes to international events, they are the best prepared. And finally, we wrapped up our weekend of BR6 action with another hot game and the most historical matchup between two orgs in Brazil. As talking of upsets, FaZe looked to rebound after their tough loss to Santos the night before, now up against Team Liquid, who had looked fast out the blocks with their new players and OT win against Ninjas in Pyjamas on Saturday. And it was definitely fair to say that FaZe had learned their lessons from the previous loss and were much more tidy and cautious. We saw them often patiently hold angles and wait for Liquid players to enter their lane, instead of pushing forward solo with the man advantage and hoping they wouldn't run into an enemy defender. But Liquid are just looking really good right now, as they forced FaZe's hand, lurking around the map with ops like Vigil or using Mute and forcing FaZe to double drone or face check, which over a half will favour you, giving Liquid a solid 3-3 defensive half on the board for themselves, heading on to attack on Chalet, a map which is much more easy to collect attacking rounds compared to many others. Those 3 rounds had kept FaZe in the game though, as they were able to muster up some defensive wins and some good delay game along with post-plant retakes in round 8 and round 10 in Kitchen. FaZe now sat at match point at 6-5, but Liquid's late round composure had finally come to fruition, as this time with minimal time to execute, they were able to get the diffuser down safely with minimal space to do so, and this time were much more efficient in their post plant, fighting back with their backs against the wall to secure overtime, both teams finding 3 rounds on both halves, a sign of how close of a level these teams were playing at in this matchup. FaZe were finally in the driver's seat though, and adjusted well after flipping sides in OT, being much more efficient with their time management on attack. But Resets didn't care, as it was Liquid's time to retake in the post plant on Kitchen, Resets grabbing a nice quad to break the hearts of FaZe after cameraman accidentally team killed his teammate. FaZe are a very emotional team, and I think that team kill could have easily blew them out the water, but a failed rush from Liquid was the return in momentum FaZe needed, as we headed to max overtime, and FaZe were so close to being counted out, a 4v5 with one FaZe player injured, but the clutch ability was nuts from the men in red, as despite Nesk finally showing up in the final round of the match with a triple, leaving Liquid in a 4v2, FaZe's IGL and the player with the most rivalry against Liquid, Cameraman, clutched up with a great collection of kills and a 1v1 finisher against Nesk, winning the game 8-7 for them. I'm not even going to try and break down that final part of the last round, so here it is for you to check out for yourselves.
Play a 2 versus 3 until Camera gets back on his feet, which it is going to be the case of 2 versus 4. Oh my word, I have never seen a round like this play out. Nesk has went up the stairs, eliminated 2. Nesk the third as well. Oh my word, the Terminator is active. And it's all down to Cameraman against 2. Oh my word, Ask No doesn't win it. Cameraman as well. Nesk No, Cameraman wins it. What have we just witnessed? You will never see a round like that ever again.
Great bounce back from FaZe and a much less sloppy game compared to their loss to Santos, doing it against none other than Team Liquid. Congrats to them, and hopefully this will be the boost they need to push for the rest of the stage and to the upcoming November major. And finally, heading over to Europe, the first game I want to jump into is Virtus Pro vs Rogue. Prano's first game for Rogue was not at all an easy one, as Virtus Pro likely saw their CIS Russian counterparts Empire's great performance at the major and felt fired up heading into this stage. This was 2 quality teams who just hadn't been able to find their form in the last stage, so I was expecting to see some high level play here after some downtime and roster changes to reassess. VP were playing good Siege, but sometimes against a team like Rogue, good Siege isn't enough, as when players like Cryan and Aces are running around hitting multi-kills or opening rounds for them, it can be difficult to just play your defaults and find success. VP were refragging quite well though, despite losing the opening pick a lot on attack, and that's one of the best ways to counter that Rogue playstyle, not allowing these lurking players to go unpunished to keep your team in the round when it comes to man count and map control. Milon was starting to heat up as VP fought back to a 3-3 first half heading into a second, and it was mostly him keeping them in the game, securing 4Ks and 3Ks throughout the map to stop Rogue running away with the game. But it was an unlikely Rips to answer back, slapping down VP with an ace on Buck in round 9 to keep them 1 step ahead and 1 round ahead of the Russians. It didn't last long though, as a few misplays saw Rogue fall behind up against match point, but they kept their composure and secured overtime, another one on the list of many overtimes for Virtus.pro this season. And on that, it didn't end up going in their favour, as a 4v2 for VP flipped to Rogue with their debut player Prano earning his salary, clutching a nice 1v2 on Maestro to now put them on match point for the first time. Rogue took a big risk on their final attack, going for a rush, but it worked perfectly against a structured team like Virtus.pro, completely catching them off guard with their pants down, Rogue having 5 people alive in the post plant. Rask attempted to find the post plant ace, only finding 1 before being put out his misery in an 8-6 win for Leon and the Germans. Much more encouraging stuff for Rogue in their first game back, and unfortunately ghosts of their past for VP in another OT loss where they had the chance to close it out in regulation. The major runners-up Team Empire had an exciting first game against Carvana Gaming, who themselves had picked up their new young star Benjamaster. I mentioned in my major roundup that this final stage for Empire for me would be the final deciding factor on the state of this team heading into the next season, as there have been massive highs and lows throughout the season and its international events. And what better way to prove it and turn up the heat for them than on a newly refreshed and changed bank, for the first time since its return to the competitive map pool. As mentioned earlier, Benja added himself to the list of rookies who had big first rounds on their debut, picking up a 3k on Sledge and saving Carvana in round 1 to allow Anarchic to get down the plant uncontested. Dan on Alibi was holding his own though, applying his own pressure back and gave Empire the vocal point they needed to allow their backline players like Shepard to shine. But Carvana was switched on also, as after losing an open area bomb site attack earlier in the match, they rushed into kitchen with a fairly successful push, as Anarchic cleaned up the final Empire player and added a 3rd round to their attacking tally, followed by a 4th on the same site on what was likely to be a defender-sided bank, so at 4-2, the game was arguably theirs to lose. And Benja continued to impress, collecting a double opener on Vigil, leading Carvana to being 5-2 up, and I was so impressed with him, not just for handling the pressure of a team like Empire who had just finished first in EUL Stage 2, along with being runners-up at the major, but I really respected his discipline. He was playing his aggressive roles well around the map, but he knew when was the time to hold the angle patiently, and also when was the time to take the man advantage he had secured his team without overextending being greedy. Impressive stuff from Benja at the young age of just turning 18, and it was clear to see he was a study of the pro level, and not just champion ranked, as it wasn't just all guns blazing for him, which gets punished at a pro level compared to ranked, and it was much more measured, which was nice to see. Empire started to wake up though, as despite Dan slowing down from his first half, the rest of the players like Always and Joystick started putting their stamp on the game, being really clutch in the late round with hitting their shots and being in the right places at the right time, bringing the scoreline all the way back to 5-5 from 5-2. They had finally found their feet in the matchup and seemed to have gotten the read they needed on Carvana, neutralizing Benja and Grizzly from having such an impact round to round, now themselves sitting at match point. However, Benja wasn't trying to hear that and wasn't done, as he collected a 3k and double in the post plant retake, flying out of CEO window to kill Joystick on the rappel and shut down Empire's last player left alive to secure Empire the full 3 points in regulation. Another clutch from a man disadvantage on attack for Empire put them at 7-6 for match point, needing 1 defensive round to close it out, and they almost did in a basement retake, being milliseconds away from defusing and finishing the game 8-6, but no, as fractions of a second saved Cowana and put them on the favourable defense. Once again, Benja found the opener and fell back to site, which happened to be the basement, which is the best site you could ask for to have the man advantage, as he collected his 19th kill to finish it up, as after the shenanigans of the previous round, they found their second OT round win to come out victorious 8-7. Unbelievable how, like we always say, Siege is such fine margins, 0.02 seconds being the difference between Empire securing the win and taking the loss. Heartbreaking stuff, where a single vault compared to a long arm defuse made all the difference, but this is why we tune into R6 Esports, as Benja for me had the best debut of any player this season. And Benja wasn't given an easy introduction to EUL, as in the following playday, they were forced to go all the way to Max OT once again, this time against Navi in an 8-7 win for him and Carvana. Honestly, this is really impressive for Carvana though, as we shouldn't forget that despite Benja being the man of the hour, this whole team is in their first season of Tier 1 play, and only have 2 extra stages under their belt than their young Dane they picked up. So the fact that they could focus for that many rounds for 2 games in a row against 2 of the undeniable top 4 teams in Europe and still come out on top is something to be really proud of. The banter was flying between these 2 familiar rosters from Yukin, as Doki dropped a question mark in a successful round 1 for Navi, attempting to tilt Carvana, following it up with a second round. Carvana knew better though, and didn't let this affect them, rebounding with 5 rounds of their own and stunning Navi, finding the opening pick in 4 of those 5 rounds, as Navi struggled to trade back kills and eventually were picked apart one by one. Impressively, Navi managed to adjust, refragging much more effectively or just finding that opening pick outright, and the dynamic duo of Doki and Blur now being at 11 and 9 kills each after 10 rounds, evening the score up somehow to 5-5. Another game, as mentioned, went back and forth for Carvana with all 15 rounds played out, but in the final round, Carvana managed to break the streak and collect 2 in a row, being successful with the difficult task of winning their OT attack, as it really was fine margins, with Grizzly collecting a 1v1 against Doki, who almost brought it back from a 2v4. It wasn't to be though, as Carvana found their second win of the stage, winning 8-7, and with the caliber of teams they have faced, they're looking to make a push for the November major, facing G2 next. Will they go 3-0 against the top 4 teams of EUL last stage? Let me know in the comments down below. A really interesting first week of games across the world, and the storylines are really building. From Benja looking to be a new star in EUL, to the new face of Team Liquid, we were treated to all sorts of great matchups. As mentioned before, a lot of work goes into editing these videos, so a like would be really appreciated, and feel free to subscribe if you're not already. This was, I think, the longest or one of the longest videos I've made on the channel so far, so I hope you enjoyed and it wasn't too much to digest. Anyways, enjoy the rest of week 2 and I'll catch you at the end of it. Peace.